song. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who had sold grain to all of its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." "No," he said to them, "you have come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with her father, and one is no more." Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you. You are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us." Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." They did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain in their donkeys and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of his sack. "My silver has been returned," he said to his brothers. "Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other trembling and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. They said, "The man who is lord over the land spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, 'We are honest men. We are not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan.' Then the man who is lord over the land said to us, 'This is how I will know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me, so I will know that you are not spies, but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the land.' As they were emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was his pouch of silver. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened. Their father Jacob said to them, 'You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me.' Then Reuben said to his father, You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back." But Jacob said, "My son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow."
Way to go. Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you, Lexi. Appreciate that. Big story, and we're continuing on an even bigger story of Joseph. We've been in the life of Joseph for, I think this makes week 5 now at this point, And this next week may or may not be our last week. I haven't quite decided on that yet. But if you've been here, then you kind of know what we've been tracking along. But if you haven't been here, then let me maybe catch you up briefly on what we've been doing. Joseph, coming from the book of Genesis, first book in the Bible, is the story by a young man that is sold into slavery by his brothers, right? He's got this fancy coat given to him by his father, goes down to the land of Egypt. He's sold to a person named Potiphar, and man, he sort of rises to power. Joseph is the kind of guy that everything he touches just sort of turns to gold, right? And man, we see these incredible lessons from Joseph's life. Man, he's morally above reproach in just about every way. Like, man, he is really this incredible picture. And that's kind of the metaphor that we've been using throughout this entire study, is that of a picture. So we talked about, like, if someone takes a picture and, say, in front of like Mount Rainier, right, and you have this far-off object in the background, right, we can't focus on two things at once, and so what do? We typically will blur out the object in the background so that we can focus on the image in the foreground. And I know you guys are getting tired of hearing this illustration, but I think it actually helps us understand what we're doing week after week. And the deal is if we focus on the foreground images, the stuff that may be immediately evident from Joseph's story, we walk away with these like sort of moralistic platitudes, right? Like, be forgiving, or like, don't hold a grudge. God works out all these things for good. And like, man, these are good things, theologically sound things, and like maybe even things that like we should be hanging on to. But actually what I've tried to show you week after week is that there's this story behind the story. That Joseph's story actually is pointing our eyes forward to another story. And week after week, we've been going back and showing how Joseph's story actually, it points our eyes to a story that actually matters a lot to our personal lives. And today is going to be no different. We're going to continue that trend, and we're going to look at the story behind the story. Now, Lexi read us one chapter, and we're going to actually end up covering about 4 chapters today, so I got to kind of move through it. And if you just heard we're getting out of here late, there's a good chance that's true. So sorry. But anyways, that's 4 chapters. We're not going to read all 4 chapters, right? You see how big one chapter was. But we're going to kind of cover 4 chapters worth of content as we see Joseph and his brothers come back. This is the big moment, right? It's been 20 years, and this is the moment that like Joseph and his brothers finally kind of come back together, and we get to see how that reunion works out, because as we know, they didn't leave on super great terms the last time, right? Brothers sold them into slavery, and so this is the drama that's been building up. But before we do that, I want to talk about the hero's montage. Do you guys know what the hero's montage in a movie is? Anybody know? Anybody want to take a stab at it? What's the montage? Anybody? It's okay, you can talk in church. It's good. So I'll do it. Here's the deal. There's that 30-second to a minute clip in just about every movie, be it a sports movie, I think like Rocky, right? Any Marvel film. In fact, we were watching like a Harry Potter movie last night, and I laughed because we come to this place and there's the montage. It's like the inspiring music, right? And so there comes this moment early on in the story where the football team, the hero, the boxer, right? They come up against their arch nemesis and they lose, or it's like, dude, this guy is way more equipped than I am, right? And so they have to get ready for the big fight. And there's like the training montage, and for Rocky, he's like running through the streets, and he runs to the top of the stairs. You guys know, it's inspiring music, and it's like, and by the end of this, you're like pumped up and ready to go. Everybody knows the feeling, whether you want to like deny it or not. You know the feeling at the end of the hero's montage, right? Like you're jacked up and you're ready for this guy to go beat the White Russian. And so like that's what you're supposed to feel. And what's incredible about that is there's actually like the montage is actually connected to some really deep psychology. And so who in here like fancies psychology? Anybody? I'm fascinated by it. And nobody? Well, it's going to be dry for the next few seconds for you then, because we're going to talk about it. And so you guys, do y'all know do you know the term stream of consciousness? You guys kind of realize that stream of consciousness? I'll read you something about this and how it relates primarily to the hero's montage. Yes, there's an article, a scholarly article that talks about how psychology relates to the hero's montage. If you ever wonder what being a pastor looks like, it looks like reading articles like that on some days, right? But here it is. Here I'll read you a quote from this. Stream of consciousness originated from the book The Principles of Psychology, written by American psychologist William James. The author thinks that the interpretation of human consciousness is not a simple fragment connection, meaning that like our consciousness, who we are, what affects our decisions, the way that we perceive and interact with the world around us, isn't based off of just a single cross-section moment in time. Even the present, right? Like our experience right now in the present, it isn't the sum total of who we are as a person or how we think, right? Pretty fancy way of saying something actually really simple, right? But instead, it consists of this complex matrix of like different things. It's rational and consciousness, right? Whatever that is, right? And it's illogical and irrational subconscious consciousness. That is to say that our consciousness, what makes us us in the way we think and perceive the world, isn't just the things. It isn't just based off this current moment or like the current stimulus, that it's actually this complex matrix of things that we think that are both logical and illogical. It's subconscious things that we don't even know that we're thinking but are going on behind the stream, right? And this is how stream of consciousness sort of gets its name, right? Because in human thought, the past consciousness will be interwoven with the present consciousness, thus forming a realistic sense of time and subjective feeling similar to a river that can flow, right? It means that our consciousness is made from this complex set of experiences, events, pasts and presents, right? Things like just imagine a river. It's got all these little tributaries that run into it, and that feeds in to make us who we are. But sort of the element that makes our consciousness what it is time, right? It's not any one moment. It's protracted over an amount of time. And so the author goes, let's get out of that, right? Because that's super complicated. And let's relate this back to the hero's montage, right? So here's what they're doing in the hero's montage. They take this thing that realistically Rocky training to fight the big Russian guy, right? Like, dude, that's months, if not years of preparation. Who's going to sit around and watch that, right? Like, if we actually had to watch Rocky run 10 miles, it would be a 2-hour movie of just him sweating and grunting. Like, I don't want to hear Stallone grunt for 2 hours as he, like, runs. Nobody wants to watch that, right? But we can show him punching some meat, and then, like, a little later, he's doing something else, and, running up the steps. And so what happens is we get to, like, sort of jump into that character's stream of consciousness as we experience this thing over time, right? He was one thing, and then this period of time has progressed, and now he's this completely other thing. Here's the deal. Good stories, like the best stories, are the stories that draw you in and make you feel like you're part of the action, right? And the movie producers know that you're not a Golden Glove boxer. You're also not a billionaire scientist who makes robot suits, right? You're not on the winning sports team or the underdog sports team, right? And they know that you're not going to do the work of being one of those things. But if they can take you along on the journey over time, slip you into the main character stream of consciousness, then all of a sudden now you're invested, right? Now you feel the same thing that character feels. It's hope, it's expectancy, it's, dude, let's go knock out the Russian, right? Everybody's jacked up when Rocky runs up those stairs, and you're meant to feel that because you've been drawn into the story. Everybody get that? Everybody understand? Like, really complicated way of saying, like, montages are good at their job, and that's to draw us in to the story. Now, here's the deal. Why in the world do I talk about the hero's montage? And what does it have to do with Joseph's story? Week 1 of this study, I told you guys that the biblical authors are absolute literary geniuses. Dude, they're incredible. Like the more you study, the more you get to know how they wrote and the things that they used to sort of make their story work. It's incredible, man. And here's the deal. People who read the Joseph narrative, whether they believe it or not, like if they're serious about literary criticism, they all agree on one thing, and that it is a masterpiece. And the author is doing things with like plot and narrative and character development that are incredible. And actually, we get this moment in the Joseph narrative that works a lot like the hero's montage. And Lexi read us the very first part of that. And it's sort of developed over these 3 over these 3 chapters, 42, 43, and 44, where we see the actual hero of the story sort of come to life, right? And so it's meant to draw us in, just like a hero's montage on TV, right? It's meant to draw our minds in if we read the story as it's meant to be read, is this sort of montage of events that is setting up this incredible like character reveal. If we follow the story in that light, this is incredible. And I promise you, it's a new way to see the Joseph narrative and to read this, right? Because we've all probably read this at some point. And I promise you, you've missed the real beauty of this. And so if you want to hang with me for a few seconds, we're gonna go on the character montage. So cue the montage music, all right? You guys ready? But to do that, we got to go backwards for just a second, and we got to talk about a couple of things. I told you guys that if you're going to read the book of Genesis well, you have to keep in mind 3 major themes. Those being the themes of land, seed, and covenant. Land, seed, and covenant. Now here's the deal. We ain't got time to unpack all 3 of those, but I do have time to talk about one of them. And so this morning, we're going to talk about this idea of seed. And that conversation begins all the way back on page 3 of your Bible. So if you have your Bibles, Genesis chapter 3, we're going to pick up there. And that's actually where our Joseph narrative starts. I read this verse to you guys a few weeks ago, but the story is God creates everything. It's amazing. Humankind, we mess it up. God comes back and is like, what did you do? And there's this moment where God's like, well, here are the results of your actions, right? Like you broke this awesome and amazing thing that I've created, and it's going to be broke forever unless something happens. And then there's this moment where we get this like little seed of hope. You may remember what Genesis 3:15 was called. I said it like two weeks ago. It's worth a $5 gift card to Shiplap. Gary's buying, if you remember. So anybody remember what that was called? The Protevangelium, right? Protevangelium. So here it is. Let's read this. This is where the sort of seed narrative begins. He says, and I will put enmity between you and the woman. God's speaking to the serpent at this point, between you, the serpent, and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, right? The seed of the serpent, this one that up to this point in the story, we know that he's a no-gooder, right? Like he brings temptation. In fact, he's sort of like halfway responsible for the destruction of the good order of God's creation, right? Between his seed, the further future generations of the seed of this serpent, and between her seed, talking to Eve. He, the seed of the woman, shall bruise you on the head, right? Like, what do we do to snakes, right? You step on them, right? Like, it's a kind way of saying to kill him. And you, serpent, shall bruise him on the heel. What does a snake do to the heel of a person, right? They get them, right? And so it's sort of like the simultaneous death blow, like between these two people. Like somehow this is the seeds of like the next verse of like, I'm going to make things right, and this is how I'm going to make things right. This is how I'm going to fix what you broke, and it's going to come through this seed, the seed of a woman. And the rest of Genesis begins to track the seed. The very next chapter, we see Cain. And he's drug away and he's tempted by the seed of the serpent. What does he do? He kills the promised seed up to that point, his brother Abel, right? And how does that work, right? We see a curse come on Cain. We see another curse. The second time a curse has been sort of proclaimed. And at the end of that same chapter, Genesis chapter 4, we see that Adam and Eve, they have another son. We see that the hope isn't gone. The seed will continue. And we learn that his name is Seth. And he's going to be the seed of promise. You guys know this story, right? And then what typically happens at this point is we like flip right over chapter 5, because what is it? It's just a list of names. If you're looking in your Bible, it's a list of these names, and we can't read half of them, and so we just like, and then, chapter 6, right? And we're getting into Noah, right? But the problem is that if you miss chapter 5, then you miss the promise of how God is passing down this like promised seed from person to person to person, all the way to this guy named Noah, right? I'd venture a guess that you probably know the story of Noah pretty well, right? But what happens after that is the story, after the flood, is the story of how the seed gets passed on, right? He's got 3 sons that he takes on the ark with him, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And at the end of the Noah narrative, we see the seed narrative sort of pick back up, right? And one of the brothers does something despicable, and the other 2 brothers, they kind of come into Noah's aid. And here it is, Genesis 9:26. Here's what Noah says as he sort of proclaims the seed and who's going to carry on this seed of promise, right? And he also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." So the promised seed is going to continue through the line of Shem. And then, what comes next? Chapter 9. Anybody got it open in their Bibles? List of names, right? Another one of those things we just sort of skip over, and we don't think there's anything really big happening. But if you see the story in terms of land, seed, and covenant, then that chapter is incredibly important, right? Because what's happening? Person to person to person, generation after generation, this seed of promise moves on and on and on, and it's incredible. And at the end of chapter 11, we get this little statement right here. It's the end of this list of names. Now these are the records of the generations of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran became the father of Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah. We don't know what that means, but we don't think it's actually positive, right? Something bad happened in the land of his birth, in Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took wives for themselves. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Then we get this really interesting little piece of information. Sarai, Abram's wife, was barren. She had no seed. She had no ability to produce a child. So up to this point in the story, what would we expect? Well, Nahor, right? The promised seed has to continue on through Nahor. That's what's coming next. And yet, you turn over to chapter 12, the very next chapter, and here's what you read. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." I don't know if you saw it or not. We went really quick there, but land, seed, and covenant were all in that, man. They were all 3 in that passage. Now, here's the deal. If you've never read the Abraham story all the way through for yourself, is the idea of seed, is that a big deal or not? Incredibly, right? The entire meta-narrative of Abraham's story revolves around this idea of barrenness and seed, right? And they can't have one. And so Sarah offers up her servant and says, well, here, you can have a child through him. And God says, no. I don't want any seed. I want the seed, right? I will bless him and I will make a great nation of him. But I have this promised seed, and he does something incredible. He works a miracle, and he allows this old woman and this old man to conceive a child. And then we get Isaac. The seed continues with Isaac, right? And something interesting happens with Isaac because he has 2 sons, and we learn that unlike sort of the culture around, it was typical that the older brother would be the guy, right? He would be the one that it would continue. He's the guy who gets the inheritance. He's the guy that the family name sort of continues through. But something interesting happens, and it's the younger brother named, anybody know? Jacob, right? Then the story picks up with Jacob. This is all important, I promise. We're covering a lot of ground. You didn't know you were going to cover 50 chapters of Genesis this morning when you got in, right? But this is where we're going. It's all incredibly, incredibly important, right? So Jacob, he gets in a little bit of trouble at home, and he goes off to a foreign land, and he sees this woman and thinks he's met the one, right? And it's love at first sight. And so he works 7 years, and it's a day has passed. And then he marries her, and the next morning he realizes he actually married the other one, right? Dude, it's the one that wasn't beautiful. He didn't love her. He didn't want her at all. And he completely gets duped into this thing. And so he works another 7 years, and he finally does get to marry the one, right? And then, dude, it blows up, and it gets really hard to track. Man, y'all, Jacob is like Snoop Dogg. If if women spend too long in the same room with this cat, they get pregnant, right? And so he is like kids left and right with servants and women and stuff like this. But what's amazing is that the woman he loves actually can't bear children. And so you're supposed to sort of go back to the Abraham story and be like, man, there's something happening here. Maybe this is the one, like this is the one through whom the promised seed. Maybe God is going to do something, right? And he does. He opens her womb. Like he's already had several kids up to this point. And then he opens Rachel's womb and she can have a kid. This is it. This is the promised seed, right? It's Joseph, right? Plot twist. That's who the kid is. It's Joseph. And then we've been in the story of Joseph for several weeks now. And like, dude, if this guy isn't the guy, I don't know who it is, right? But here's the deal. You're meant to sort of begin to read into the Joseph story a little bit. It's supposed to kind of make you feel uneasy. Like if you've been tracking this whole seed narrative, this thing's driving me nuts this morning. Sorry about that, guys. If you've been tracking the whole seed narrative, then something about the Joseph story is meant to sort of rub you the wrong way because Joseph is awesome. In the rest of the promised seeds, they've been losers, man. Like, I'm sorry, but like Abraham's a liar. Isaac is hands down one of the worst fathers. Like, dude gets the grade A Father of the Year award, right? Like, not good. Jacob, the dude's name literally means like heel grabber and supplanter. Like he's a sneaky little weasel. And like what he didn't do, like it's easier to make a list of the things that Jacob didn't do, right? Dude, these guys are bad dudes. And you're meant to read this and you're reading through Joseph and it's like, whoa, wait a second. Something ain't right. This guy ain't a loser like all the rest of them, right? Like Joseph is awesome. And I think like, here's the deal, like, maybe a bit of good news, just as a brief stopover, because I know I've covered a lot of ground. So let's. You guys still with me? Everybody good? We good? Cool. All right. It's not hot in here this week either. That's awesome. So here's a bit of good news. I think that we can see from just an observation here. Right? God uses people in spite of their brokenness. Can we just take a little quick layover on this truth real quick? Right? I think up to this point in the land seed covenant narrative, we see God use some incredibly broken and screwed up people. Like not because they had anything to bring to the table. In fact, he uses them in spite of the messed up stuff that they did, like that would have shipwrecked anyone else's plan at every turn, and yet like God uses them, and in fact uses their mess ups like in spite of them for his good purpose and for his plan. Here's the deal. I know that's like a really simple and almost trite point to make, but I want you to just think about the implications of that, real life implications of that for a second. Like God uses people in spite of their brokenness. That isn't a license to sin. Isn't a license to be broken, right? Well, we don't need a license to do that because we're going to do that anyways, right? Like, actually, this is hope on the backside of our sin and our brokenness. This is freedom from guilt and shame. That what you've done and said and thought, right? Like that those things aren't the culmination of who you as a person are. And your story continues far beyond anything that you've done or said or thought, right? Like God uses people in spite of their brokenness. And man, if you can fully grasp that is world changing. That is like that is a level of freedom that there's nothing else that can provide that. But when you grasp and you fully begin to understand and live into that truth that God uses broken people in spite of their brokenness, dude, incredible. Here's the deal. I could camp out there all day, but we need to get to our montage, right? Here's the deal. We need to know who the seed of promise is. And if you were here last week, I sort of gave it away a little bit. Actually, it wasn't even in my notes, and I just sort of jumped ahead. And I've been kicking myself all week, but I realize that most of y'all probably don't remember that. So we're gonna just pretend like that didn't happen, and we're gonna go back and even if you do remember, then just go on the journey with me, right? Because Because to see the beauty of this story, we have to see how this seed narrative sort of comes to an end in the Joseph story. You guys good with that, right? So who is the chosen seed? And so it could be Joseph. Right now, it looks like it should be Joseph, right? Because he's awesome, and his brothers are like, they're scoundrels. And so it should be him, but let's just pretend for a second like it could be any of them, right? You just want to humor me in that. And it could be any of these 12 brothers, right? It doesn't have to be the oldest. We've established that. It doesn't have to be the most beloved. We've established that. In fact, there's a good bit of evidence that shows that it's not Joseph because they've all been sort of losers up to this point, right? And so let's humor. So here's the deal. Big reveal. It's Judah, right? This isn't Joseph's story. This isn't Jacob's story. This is actually Judah's story. We've been tracking Joseph's story for the past several weeks, so we kind of know where he's at, right? He's landed the job in Egypt. He's saving the entire world. Man, this thing's driving me nuts. He's saving the entire world, right? Like things are really actually going quite well for Joseph at this point in his story. But what we haven't heard about in several weeks is the brothers. But luckily, chapter 42, what Lexi read, gives us sort of the state of the brothers. So let's go back and let's read that, right? Now Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt. Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you sitting around here staring at one another," right? Can you just hear the inflection in Jacob's voice as he says, "Behold, hey man, I've heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place so that we may live and not die." Dude, don't tell me there's not humor in the Bible, right? Because these are grown, stinking men. Some of them have, like, grandkids, right? Just imagine the scene with me. Jacob there in his wheelchair, right, like old, and then all of the 11 brothers gathered around a table, and there's like a single bean sitting on the table, right? And he's like, "What are you idiots doing? I can't believe I'm still having to solve your problems for you. Go to Egypt and buy us some grain," right? Like, so we can live and not die, right? And they're like, oh, yeah, of course, Dad, you know? And so it's like, it's sort of meant to make you like, dude, nobody has emerged as a clear leader, right? If the chosen seed is amongst these 11 guys, then like it's a grab bag. Could be any of them, right? Because they're all losers, actually. And so that's where we're at. And so they tuck their tail between their legs and shamefully go load up the donkeys, and they head down to Egypt. And we read that story, right? But cue the montage music, because we're about to see something happen with Judah. And if you've been reading along week to week, then we've actually already seen something happen with Judah that you may not have noticed, because we actually skipped that chapter when we were preaching about it. Joseph's story starts in Genesis 37. And then there's this weird break, and it tells this really like out-of-place story in Genesis 38 about Judah and Tamar. Suffice it to say, I'm not going to get into the gritty details of that, but that story absolutely revolves around the idea of the chosen seed and what people do with that seed, and like do the wrong thing with that, and it'll get you killed, right? And we see Judah like, yep, that's the type of scoundrel we know. You know, that's the type of guy that God kind of tends to use. And that's sort of what we see in the Judah and Tamar narrative from Genesis chapter 38. So we've already sort of gotten this clue that maybe Judah is the guy, right? We've already read how chapter 42 goes, right? The brothers come, they meet Joseph, and then he actually puts them through this series of tests. Now, a lot of sermons will sort of diverge at this point, and they'll go into the 7 tests of Joseph, right? Here's the idea. Joseph is asking them questions. He's putting them through the ringer essentially to see if they have like changed their murderous ways or not. Are you the same brothers that sold me into slavery, or has there been some character development in you? And so chapter 42 sees these 7 tests of the brothers, and like they sort of just bumble their way through and like halfway fail, halfway succeed. Like it's not impressive, right? 43 opens up. They're standing around the table looking at the single bean with their father. Father goes back through the thing. Hey, goobers, go back to Egypt and get food, right? But here's the bad news, because we read it in 42, that they're not allowed to come back to Egypt unless they bring who back with them? Benjamin, right? It's Joseph's actual blood brother. His full blood brother, probably pretty close to his age, would have been his best friend growing up. Like, is Benjamin okay? I want to see Benjamin, right? But he can't say that because he hasn't revealed himself. And so he sets up this thing. I'm going to keep Simeon here until you bring Benjamin back. And so Judah sort of pipes up and he's like, oh, hey, by the way, Dad, we can't go back unless we bring your other favorite son with us, right? The very thing that he didn't want them to do, right? And we see this moment, like montage music is blaring in the background, and we see this moment of character development for Judah, right? Judah said to his father, Israel, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, we as well as you and our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame before you forever. Now, this is Judah, right? For if we had not delayed, surely by now we could have returned twice. Now, this is massive in the character development of Judah, right? Let me remind you of what the last thing we seen in the Joseph narrative. This is the last thing that Judah said in the Joseph narrative. You ready? Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listen to us. Listen to him. Now, here's the deal. I've heard guys say that that's Judah like sticking up for Joseph, right? Heard that preached, heard that talked about, and like, here's the deal. No, that's not the case. Did you notice? He said, "What profit is it for us?" Judah wasn't being altruistic or morally upright. It was just easier to clear his own conscience if they didn't kill him, right? Hey, how about we don't kill him, right? Morally upright would have been, how about we don't kill him or sell him? How about we like take him back home, right? That would have been morally upright. That would have been a good brother. No. This is actually Judah being incredibly selfish and just not wanting to have to cover up a murder. He's already been there and he don't want to go there again. He knows what that's like, right? And yet, in this moment, like Judah is putting himself down as like payment for his brother. He's offering himself up as collateral that if anything should happen to Benjamin, right? Like man, you can lay the guilt on me. But he actually develops a little bit more. Chapter 44 comes, and we see this other set, or over the course of chapter 43, we see this other set of trials. It's pretty much the same thing. Joseph puts grain in their sack. He asks them some questions about his father and brothers, and then he does this thing, man. This is like, dude, this is borderline cruel, honestly. He puts the money and his favorite like cup in Benjamin's sack, his little brother, and he sends him home. So then after they leave, Joseph sends his servants, some of his guards, to go catch up with them. And they're like, hey, you stole from us. And the brothers are like, no, we didn't steal from you, right? We told you what happened last time. There's some sort of a mistake, some sort of a mix-up, right? No. You stole from us, and the person in whose bag it is found will be a slave to Pharaoh forever. So one by one, they open up their sacks. Here's what 11 through 13 says. They hurried. Each man lowered his sack to the ground, and each man opened his sack. He searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. And then, don't miss the symmetry and the beauty of this statement. Then they tore their clothes, and when each man loaded his donkey, they returned to the city. Yeah, I actually don't know how to accurately convey the despair that these men felt in this moment. I mean, we get one sentence about them tearing their clothes and going back to the city, but man, can you just put yourself in these guys' position for just a second? What was the one thing Dad said, right? Like, what was the one thing Dad said, like, don't come back if you don't got Benjamin with you, right? Like, you better keep your brother safe. And he just opened up his bag and found the cup in there, right? I cannot, like, Can you imagine, just listen to this. Can you imagine the irony that set in on these men as they looked down at their torn robes as they walked into certain slavery in Egypt? Do you think that Joseph's story was maybe in their mind? We tore our brother's robes. We saw, and as we're watching our brother sail off into slavery in Egypt, off into the sunset, they're tearing their brothers. Do you think the imagery was lost on these guys? Right? We already saw in chapter 42 how they think that what they did to Joseph is all their fault. Right? So they get back to Egypt. And we see another step in Judah's development. Here it is, 44:14. When Judah and his brothers came back to Joseph's house, he was still there, and they fell to the ground before him. 11 brothers standing there before Joseph, and yet Judah's name is mentioned specifically. It's because of what happens next. This is what the whole story has been building to, right? This is the montage music. This is Judah climbing like the proverbial rocky steps, right? And this is where our minds are meant to be like, oh, maybe there is like a chosen seed amongst the sons of Jacob, right? Maybe there is hope in this story for the snake-slaying king, right? Like maybe there is hope for this after all, because all of a sudden we see Judah's name mentioned, and then here's what happens next. He for 13 verses, he retells the story to Joseph about what happened. Hey, man, we went home. We told our father. He's like, man, don't let anything happen to Benjamin. And then we came back. We don't know what happened. We didn't steal the stuff. I promise you, right? We just opened up the sack and we found it. And Benjamin's like, we can't not let Benjamin go home, right? This is Judah pleading for 13 verses for his brother's life. And here's how the story ends. 44 verses 33 through 34. He says, now, therefore, please let your servant. This is Judah speaking to Joseph, who they still don't know who he is, right? Now, therefore, please let your servant Judah, right, remain instead of the lad, a slave to my Lord. And let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me? For the fear that I see the evil that would overtake my father. Did you catch the beauty and the symmetry of this statement? It was Judah who proposed the plan of selling Joseph into slavery. That's where our hero started. Judah has been tested time and time again over these 3 chapters in his own sort of hero's montage. And look where he is now. Judah is the one with torn robes, willingly offering to become a slave so that Benjamin and his other brothers might go freely home. Dude, what a flip, right? What a change in the dynamic for Judah. And look what happens next. You've watched for 3 chapters at this point, while his brothers and Joseph have done this sort of weird dance, and Joseph never reveals himself. He gives them test after test after test, and they fail half of them, right? And then this happens, and look what happens directly after this. Then Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer to me. And they came closer, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now, do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me here before you to preserve life. Now the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth, and to keep you alive by great deliverance. Now, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his household and ruler over the land of Egypt. Man, plot twist, right? Joseph knew that God was in control. We've seen that up to this point. Joseph didn't doubt that God was in control. That's evidenced by his actions and the way that he sort of responds. But I think in this moment, for the very first time, Joseph is realizing that this was actually God's intended plan all along. right? It's like the end of a heist movie where it's like the guy heists the guy heisting the gems, right? And you realize, like, plot twist, the dude knew it was coming all along, and this was the plan. And I think there's this sort of moment in Joseph's story where he realizes, like, man, dude, like, look where my brothers have come. Look where we're at now. Look at the position I have in the courts of Pharaoh. Like, look at in this moment that he sees his brother Judah willing to lay down his life for his younger brother Benjamin. He turns around and he offers grace, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Whew. Oh my goodness. Like, where do we even land the plane at on this thing, right? Like, we've covered a lot of ground, right? Where do we even land the plane at? Right? Is it about forgiveness? Is that what this is? Is this a story about forgiveness, right? We see Joseph had already forgiven his brothers, right? But this is the moment where he had to come face to face with them. And so if that forgiveness wasn't real, right? Like maybe this is about like the process of forgiveness. You ever had to forgive somebody for something really, really hard? It's a process, right? Dude, so, and while like our forgiveness isn't contingent on like what they do or how sorry they feel about it, like our willingness to be back in relationship, maybe it actually is a little bit contingent on what they do and how they respond, right? Like while we can forgive, we don't have to open ourselves up to further hurt, right? Is that the story? Is that where we land the plane? I don't know. Maybe this is about how we set healthy boundaries, right? Maybe this is people with the most like intimate access to the most intimate places of our heart, right? We know for a fact they have the greatest ability to hurt us, don't they? Like, nobody can hurt you like family can hurt you. Like nobody knows how to wound you like a spouse can wound you, right? Those people with really intimate access. And so maybe through this we can take away something about how, like, I don't know, Joseph set some good boundaries and he put his brothers through these tests. And so maybe we should look at that, right? Maybe that's how we land the plane. Anybody walk in here with any family or spouse hurt this morning? Don't raise your hand to that, right? Yeah. Maybe that's where we land the plane. Or maybe this is about how God uses these like unsuspecting people. It's Judah. Like nobody, like plot twist, nobody saw that coming, right? Just beginning of Joseph's story, he's literally like sleeping with his daughter-in-law, right? Like that sort of thing got you killed in the land of Israel later in it. So like maybe it's about that. Paul tells us that God uses the weak to confound the strong and the foolish to confound the wise. Right? Maybe you don't see your worth, and perhaps you think the list of your failures is so great that God could never truly love you or accept you or forgive you. But look at what God did in and through Judah. Look how God shaped Judah's character in spite of his moral failures to bring salvation to the rest of the family. Anybody walk in here with any of those feelings this morning, right? Maybe we should land the plane on that one. Or maybe you didn't notice, but like I didn't read this little gem, right? This is typically the verse you hear read in this sermon. Genesis 50:20, as for you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, right? We didn't even read that little gem, right? Now, you can't preach this story without talking about that, right? Anybody walk in here feeling like defeated, like you're facing circumstances so terrible you'll never recover? Maybe it's financial issues, marital issues parenting your kids, or any one of another million things that we can be struggling with. Anybody walk in here this morning with those rain clouds hanging over your head, right? Maybe we need to land the plane here. Maybe this is a part of something bigger that God is doing in your life. And like, dude, what an awesome place to land the plane that would be, right? No, actually. I don't think it's any of those, and it's kind of all of those, actually. This is a story about land, seed, and covenant. Look at me here. Don't miss this. This isn't Joseph's story. This isn't Jacob's story. It actually isn't even Judah's story. It's not Judah's great-great-great-grandson Salmon and Rahab's story. It isn't their grandchildren, right? Boaz and Ruth. It isn't their grandchildren, David. It isn't his son Solomon. It's not any of their stories, right? The seed continues on and on and on, and it's not any of their stories. In fact, it's like, picture it this way. Imagine if you watch, Rocky IV. That's where he fights the White Russian, by the way. Like Rocky IV, he does the training, and in that one, he like runs in the frozen tundra, and he's lifting the weights in the barn and stuff. And like you watch this whole big thing, and you get pumped up, and you're excited about it. And then the very next scene is Rocky steps out into the ring, like, dude, Stallone's jacked in that one, right? And 5 seconds into the first round, Rocky gets laid out, right? Boom, credits roll. End of story, right? Rocky V, Rocky recovers from brain damage, right? Like, what if the story would have ended that way? What if that's what the hero's montage led to, right? How disappointed would you be? Bro, give me my money back. I ain't watching that. And yet, dude, that's what we get. Over and over and over again in the Old Testament, you see these guys and you think, man, maybe they're the one. They're the snake-crushing king who's going to come and he's going to vanquish evil and sin and temptation. This is the guy that's going to stomp the snake. And they fail. And you realize time and time again that they're actually just the seed of the snake still. Over and over. That's what this story does. It builds you up, and then you look back at the failures of Judah, and you're like, bro, he's not the guy. Not the guy. But there was somebody from the line of Judah, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, Jesus of Nazareth, and he was the guy. And unlike Judah, who was willing to go into slavery, Jesus gave himself in death. And unlike Judah, who did it for a brother, Jesus did it for people that hated him and spit on him and nailed his hands to a cross. Like, he gave himself in death. And guess what that unlocked? Grace, forgiveness. Just like in Judah's story, in Joseph's story, right? But unlike Joseph's story, which actually has no power in itself, right? Like, there isn't a moral or theological platitude strong enough or convincing enough in Joseph's story that it actually has any power to do anything in your life. Joseph's story's power lies in its ability to point our eyes forward to the story that actually does have the power to do that. Jesus' story. Romans 1, man, the gospel, like that, it's the power of God for salvation. That has power. Man, you want to, I don't know, man, what was the first one I say? Like, you want to forgive like Joseph forgave? You can't do that by emulating Joseph's example. Right, dude, experience the forgiveness of Jesus. Like, see your sin and your brokenness for what it actually is and feel the actual forgiveness of Jesus and allow that to like so overflow your heart. Right? That's where real forgiveness comes from. Man, you want to set healthy boundaries? Like, maybe that's, right? I mean, maybe that's it. Bro, Jesus says if you don't hate your own father and mother and brothers and sisters, right, in comparison to how you love me, like, Jesus completely reprioritizes all of our relationships, right? Like Jesus isn't just number one on the track. Jesus is the only guy running the race. And when that's the case, and it reprioritizes all of our relationships, do you know what that does for the rest of our relationships? You know what happens to those things when they get put in a proper place? Proper boundaries around them, and really the only boundary being that, like, dude, you are first and foremost a follower of Jesus through the gospel. Like, dude, that's something that has power to transform. Grace, forgiveness, any of the other themes, right? But those are just the foreground themes. And if we focus on those themes and try to, like, well, just do this, stay away from this thing, right? Like be forgiving, right? That's sort of the story that gets told, bro. It has no power. This story has no power to do that. But the story it points our eyes to has all the power to do that. So I don't know where you walked in here at today. Right? maybe you've been a follower of Jesus for a really long time. Doesn't mean you didn't walk in here with some of those rain clouds. Doesn't mean you didn't walk in here with some family hurt or some of those like bad circumstances. Doesn't mean that you're not subject to those things. You know what it is? It's going back to that gospel. It's going back to the story of Jesus and what he did for you and what he wants to do in you and through you, through the good news and through the message of that God. That's what has power. And you go back to that thing today, tonight, tomorrow morning before your feet hit the ground, and tomorrow at lunchtime when that coworker comes to your desk that you're like tempted to, say something about or whatever. Like, that's the moment. That's the moment that you go back to that story. When you need to extend grace and forgiveness in a measure that is beyond your ability to do, that's when you go back to that story. The story of Jesus. That's the power. And maybe you're here and you've never heard this story before in your life. It's your first time. It is as easy as crying out, God, save me. I'm sorry for all the ways that I have tried to run my own life. I give that to you, and I follow you from here on. Maybe you need to do that. Maybe that's the thing that changes your story in a really, really big way. I don't know where you're at, but I know that story is the story that touches all of our stories. So I'm going to pray, and if you need to talk, I'll be sticking around after church for a few minutes or fill out a connection card or whatever the case is. Like, I would love to do that. But whatever you need to deal with, I would encourage you right now, right where you're sitting, to deal with that. Don't walk out of here without going back to that gospel, either for the first time or the 15,000th time. It doesn't matter. Go back to that gospel and let it wash anew over your heart today. Will you pray with me? Father God, we love you. We praise you. God, you're good. You've given us good news. We are broken. I am broken. I'm sinful. And God, the story of the Old Testament, man, it just, every time I look at it, I just realize that, like, if hope is going to come, it has to come from beyond me. I don't know, God, but I feel like that's what you wanted. I feel like that's a big part of what you wanted us to take away from the Old Testament stories like Joseph. God, I feel that. God, I go back this morning to Jesus, who lived the life on my behalf that I was meant to live and died the death that I should have died. God, I trust you. I choose to follow after Jesus with everything that I have, God. And I just pray that you would give me the strength to do that today better than I did yesterday. God, we want to be world changers here at this church. This is the power. I just pray that it would wash over our people with just a freshness and a newness that would send us out of here, whether we're going to work, going home, going across the street, or going to Germany, God. That's the power that takes us and uses us in spite of our brokenness. God, we trust you, we love you, and we pray that you have been honored and glorified this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Awesome. Guys.